Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Screw the Whiffs. This playlist is all things intrusive thoughts. That's what whiffs are. What if. All things nervous system sensitization, all things disordered anxiety. And today we're going to talk about real event OCD. So I know I'm kind of jumping in here and just starting with, this particular theme. And if you're not familiar with much about OCD, there'll be many more episodes where I talk about that as its own diagnosis, what it looks like, the different flavors and shapes it takes. It's quite the shapeshifter. But real event OCD is often very confusing for people. When we're talking about OCD, you'll hear people talk about themes. And themes, I find it helpful on some level because it can be a little bit normalizing for people to be like, oh, it's kind of a normal thing in OCD to have harm thoughts or strange sexual thoughts or strange violent thoughts or, being unable to kind of let things go, having false memory, OCD, where you think something might have happened, but you're not sure, and now you can't stop thinking about it. But real event OCD was the one that got me. So I did not have OCD throughout my life. I had what I look back now and probably think are some anxious and OCD traits. I remember being a teenager and having some magical thinking about if I think about all the ways my grandmother can pass away, she won't die that way. Probably a little bit of a sign of some OCD. The hypervigilance was always there, probably a little bit more turned inward than the average bear, looking at things, ruminating on things a little bit more than, again, the average bear. But nothing was getting in the way or causing me distress, getting in the way of my life. And that's obviously a key difference between OCD traits, which many of us have, and OCD disorder. OC traits, obsessive compulsive traits, which many of us have, and OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. The disordered part is the piece that is when it's from a diagnostic standpoint, they look at that it's actually something that's taking up a certain amount of time. I think in the latest DSM-5, it's like at least an hour a day doing compulsions and ruminating. Ruminating is a mental compulsion. And that it's causing significant distress in your life, your relationships, your job, your ability to function. So many people have obsessive compulsive traits, but we tend to kind of lump all those people into, oh, they're a little OCD, which I think is not how I like to use that terminology at all. The disordered piece, when it does take over your life, it can be an incredibly debilitating disorder. The good news is that there's a way through it and there's a way out, and the evidence is very high for exposure and response prevention. And we'll talk a lot about that on here in terms of how to do that, especially with kind of more mental OCD. Sometimes you'll hear that referred to as pure O. So let's go back to real event OCD. Real event OCD was what kind of hit me when my OC traits went and the scratch in the record happened, and there's a before and an after, and all of a sudden it moved over into disordered. And what I mean by that is it started to take over my life. And I hit this later in life after an adverse med reaction. It took my kind of basic obsessive compulsive traits that would pop up here and there in very mild forms, and suddenly, became a real problem. Ruminating became a problem. Getting stuck on certain topics, certain themes, weird thoughts would pop up. And one of the first themes that I had was real event. It grabbed onto a pseudo memory, something that did happen, but happened so long ago I didn't really remember all the details about it. And then, they call OCD the doubting disorder. It's really my inability to tolerate the fact that I couldn't be quite sure what exactly had happened. And so my brain began to just come up with all sorts of catastrophic outcomes and catastrophic possibilities. And then the more I would think about those catastrophic possibilities, I would start to think, oh my gosh, maybe that really did happen like that. And so with real event OCD, it's a focus on something that we said or did, or or it was something that was done or said to us at some point in our lives. It could have been 5 minutes ago, it could have been at the party last night, it could have been 5 years ago, it could have been 30 years ago. But all of a sudden, we're just consumed by this, and we need to know We need to know, did I make a fool of myself? Did I hurt somebody's feelings? Did something bad happen to me when I was a kid? Did I do something? That night that I was drinking and I can't fully remember, I think I might have hurt somebody. And again, because it's based on a kernel of truth, it really trips people up, because in traditional OCD with a lot of these themes, a lot of these thoughts are what we call dystonic, meaning they're going against our values. What if I hurt my child or my dog? And you feel that because it's so scary that you would have that thought. It's so against who you are. And then you start to turn inward and think, oh my God, why would I be thinking that? And then the more attention we pay to it, the more, the louder it gets and the more stuck it becomes and the stickier it becomes. And we start to spin on this hamster wheel while we are simultaneously feeling this urgency to do something about it. Well, with real event OCD, we're not necessarily thinking a strange thought or a thought that doesn't apply to us. We're actually maybe even remembering something, again, that we did said, or wondering how it was received, or wondering if we made a fool of ourselves, or remembering a time we made a fool of ourselves, but now we can't let it go. And again, it trips us up because we can think, well, look, I can think that all these other things are OCD. If I'm having a weird thought about a family member, I'm having a weird thought about my animal, if I'm feeling strange urges about things. Okay, I've gotten on board that all that makes sense, that it's OCD. But this is something real. This is a real memory. This is something I really did, or this is something that really happened to me. But what makes it OCD, and it's really imperative that you treat it this way, is number one, if you are prone to obsessive compulsive traits, ruminating, getting stuck on things, sticky brain, magical thinking, all of those things, right? Then we need to consider, has it kind of tipped over? And this is another form that it takes. Because OCD can grab onto anything. It's fair game. All it takes is an imagination, some creativity, a highly analytical mind, usually pretty high intellect, and a fix it, get rid of it, problem solving, a little bit vigilant personality, and you are ripe to step into this. If your system gets a little sensitized and you get a little bit run down, this is why sometimes it emerges in perimenopause or during menopause. It sometimes emerges during puberty, can emerge during stressful times in our lives. It's very common in postpartum. That's why you'll see postpartum OCD, where when the hormones are in flux, all of a sudden it's a very normal thought for a mom to think, what if I hurt my child, right? Because it's the last thing they want to do with their newborn baby. But for those that are prone to developing an OCD process, they can get terrified by that thought and then be absolutely destroyed I've watched people, years of their lives being destroyed, worrying about, oh my God, I can't tell anybody that I keep having this thought, what if I hurt my kid? What if I hurt my kid? What if I hurt my kid? They're scared to tell therapists, all of that. So OCD can latch onto anything. And usually when you have it and you have a particular thought or particular theme that you're dealing with, you'll find yourself saying, well, Joe over there has OCD and he's worried about hurting his animal. I'll take that any day because I can't stop thinking about, that I can't stop focusing on my breathing, and I could handle that. I can't handle this. You can always handle the other theme that you're not having. You can't handle the one you have. So with real event OCD, again, it's tricky because what happens, that's my dog's toy. What happens is that we begin to think that, part of the rumination is, are we a bad person? So that becomes part of the compulsion, is the reassurance. Like, let me tell you about this thing I did when I was 18. Was that a really bad thing? Would you have done it? Did that ever happen to you? Did you ever go through anything like that? Would you have made a different decision? And we think that reassurance is going to be helpful. And it might be for a minute or two, or maybe even a day. And then you're going to find yourself thinking, well, I don't know if I trust that person, or that person doesn't have a huge moral compass. I better ask somebody else, right? Or, I don't think I told the story right. I better give them more details and go back again and check again. So this reassurance seeking, right? This need to check, this need to go back and review your life and line it all up and make sure you did or didn't do these things, or why did I do the thing that I did? Maybe if I did it when I was 8, okay, I can justify that I was a little kid. oh my gosh, but this thing I did when I was 28, and that's not a little kid. I need to be morally responsible for that thing I did 30 years ago. And, it's irresponsible if I'm not. So we can get really, really trapped in real event OCD. But what's really important, and you're going to hear me say this again and again and again, whether it relates to anxiety or it relates to OCD or whatever you're calling it, whatever you're struggling with, is the content really doesn't matter. Okay, I want you to think about OCD as basically this, those arcade machines, and there's like this claw you put your money in, and you move the claw around, and it goes down and it grabs it. You try to grab a toy and pull it up, right? Well, it's kind of like that. So I remember when I first started struggling with this, I had my first intrusive thought. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'll do anything. I could handle any other thought but that thought, because I'll know any other thoughts, just bullshit. It's just a bluff. I'll understand that for any other thought, but this one's really driving me crazy. And then one day it dropped that thought and it picked up something new and scared the hell out of me with that one. Why would I be thinking this? And it's not even just why would I be thinking this, but it's the feelings that come with it. It's the whoosh of anxiety or dread or disgust or shame or guilt that come along with these thoughts. And that's what we're really trying to get rid of. We're trying to get rid of the feeling that comes along with it. Now, I'll have people argue and say, no, Jennifer, I don't want to think that thought. Well, yeah, but the reality is you don't want to think that thought because that thought's making you feel that particular way. That's what you're ultimately trying to get rid of, right? And so, again, going back to that idea of the arcade game, when my first intrusive thought got dropped temporarily and another one picked up, it was scary, but it was also helpful to look at and be like, that's interesting. That thought that was driving me crazy for 6 months that I couldn't stop thinking, and I was really starting to feel like I was losing my life to it. I'm not thinking that thought right now. I'm thinking about this other thing. And even when I think about that original scary thought or that image or whatever, it's not evoking the same feeling because this other thing's got my attention right now, right? So what ends up happening is over time, this claw, sometimes it stays on the same theme for a long time. And why would it stay on the same theme for a long time? Because it's working. So the more that you're staring at the content, right? Why am I thinking this particular thought? Why can't I get this image out of my head? Why can't I let this thing go? The more you're looking at it, the more you're now ruminating about why do I have this disorder? Why is this happening? Will this ever go away? Will I ever be normal? It's never going to have to actually change to another theme because it's got your attention, right? And basically it's a misfire. So all of this is just a misfire. You've got this threat response system that's we call it our limbic system, that for various reasons and for different people, some people are predisposed to this. Most people that struggle with this, there's been some predisposition to it. Sometimes there's a precipitating event you can look at, like having a baby, being in an accident, being in a stressful time, a medication adverse reaction, things like that. You can point to, okay, this is what tipped the scales, and my traits that were very functional in my life are now disordered and really causing me a great deal of distress, okay? So, but again, I want you to recognize that the brain can come up with anything. And so the idea that now it's real event and I must be a bad person and I need to confess and I need to seek reassurance that I'm not. I need to make amends over and over and over again. And the problem with this is this turns into a whack-a-mole. For every weed you pluck in OCD garden, 2 more pop up. And you have to recognize it for the bluff that it is. Okay, and so Reed Wilson is somebody Reed Wilson, Sally Winston, and Marty Seif are kind of my 3 go-to, Jenna Overbaugh too. But Reed Wilson and Sally Winston and Marty Seif have been at this collectively. If you put all their years of experience together, you'd probably have like 130 years of experience dealing with intrusive thoughts and OCD. And Reed especially is kind of my go-to person for this. And you can look him up on YouTube. He's got some stuff. He's written some really good books. But what you're trying to always do is to not get bluffed by the content. That's what OCD does. It finds something personal to you. And that's why with real event, again, it's even more so, right? Because it's actually this thing that happened. But I'll give you an example for me with my real event. When mine started with real event, so it was really scary because I didn't know much about OCD, even though I've been a therapist for 28 years. I had never experienced it firsthand, and I didn't know just how debilitating it could feel. I didn't realize how pervasive it could be and all-encompassing it could be, how much a derailing of one's life could happen as a result of it. And because it started with real event OCD, and it was a real thing, I started to think, is this trauma? Is this something I really have to deal with? Maybe this is, I'd been trained as a therapist psychoanalytically, always getting to the bottom of things and finding the root cause, right? So there I was spending months and months and months digging around in my past, trying to put a narrative together that made sense as to why I was thinking about this thing or feeling this way or remembering this thing, or was I remembering it right? I was making myself feel crazy. And what I had to come to realize, and what really helped me, ironically, was when the claw dropped the real event, and all of a sudden one day I had an intrusive thought about, what if I stab a loved one with a pencil? Now, that might sound silly. It didn't feel silly when it happened. I was sitting with a loved one, and all of a sudden I thought, what if I just stabbed them with this pencil? Now, weird thought, yeah. Am I a violent person? No. It was somebody that I love. But it, as strange and stupid as that sounds, the feeling that came with it was so overwhelming that I literally felt shoulders go up by my ears, and I could feel it stick. And I thought, oh my God, what is this? And then for the next month, it was some variation of that. What if I hurt my loved one? What if I do something weird? What if I lose control? What if I snap and I hurt somebody that I love? And it took on this new flavor. Now, as bad as that felt, on some level, it was showing me that it was OCD. And what Reed Wilson talks about, and what Sally and actually Jenna and all the people, right, that are doing their work out there, it's all about drop the content. The content was just something that was going to get my attention. My threat response system is misfiring for various reasons. And it's showing me different topics, different themes that are going to get my attention because they make me uncomfortable, because they make me feel scared. And the more that I allow that process room to grow by looking at it, staring at it, getting reassurance, talking about it, trying to get to the bottom of things, analyzing. I mean, my whole life was based on analyzing before I got OCD. So to realize I actually have to take this tool of this analysis, and now it's a weapon in my life, and I've got to leave something alone. I've got to take this scary thought or feeling and just leave it alone. Totally antithetical to how I'd been trained, right? But that's exactly what we need to do. And so don't get bluffed, because that's what it is. It's a bluff. Do we have things in our lives that pop up that we might need to take care of, that we might feel like we need to make amends for? Sure. But it doesn't come with such a sense of urgency that you're going to come out of your skin, or that you can't go one more minute without making that phone call, or you've got to find out where that person's at to figure out if they're okay. I can't think about anything else until I do that. That is not problem solving. That is not something that, I was reflecting on something in my life and I'd like to go back and make an amends for that. No amount of urgency and dread and doom and gloom and disgust and shame and guilt and overwhelming negative feeling comes with that. Okay, so again, I want you to really make sure you're thinking about that, especially with the bluff of the real event. This idea of, am I a good person? And you know what? There's no amount of reassurance. I tried it for those months. I found all kinds of ways to try to find out, am I a good person? Am I a good person? I can't even believe I'm thinking these thoughts. Am I a bad person for thinking these thoughts? And I could have 100 people tell me, no, you're great. You're an awesome person. I could have one person just simply maybe not even hear me ask the question and think, what did they mean by that? They're not answering the question. Did I do something to them? They must think. And so I really get how consuming it can be, how pervasive it can be. And with real event, I can recognize how convincing it can be because, Jennifer, this isn't a dystonic thought. This isn't me having a strange thought about hurting my animal or a weird sexual thought or, being focused on my heart rate and not being able to think about anything else. This is me thinking back to being a jerk when I was in 8th grade. Okay, but now you're 48 years old. Isn't it interesting that now you can't let that thing go? What did you do with it for all the other years? Why is it now? And it's because, again, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. You're in some sort of sensitized state. And in that sensitized state, your vulnerability, if you have OCD, is going to be to misappropriate things and see things as danger when they're not dangerous. And things get stuck. And really what you're trying to do is you're trying to get rid of the feeling. It feels like it's about the content, but it's about the feeling the content generates. And so again, you go back to the acronym that I talked about, I think in the last video, DEAL. You decide that this is an OCD process. I'm going to treat all of this. If it's a harm thought, then treat all harm thoughts the same way. If you recognize you as OCD and something's got you in their grasp again, throw it in the bucket of OCD, make that decision. Then you're going to evoke an attitude of irrelevance, leaving it alone. You evoke your non-engagement response. That's what the E is in DEAL. So DEAL, decide, evoke, allow, and live. The evoke is evoke an attitude of irrelevance. Evoke your non-engagement response. Let it burn, leave it alone. It is what it is. Yep, there it is again. Whatever that little prompt is that reminds you to go back to the decision you've made, that you're going to treat this like an OCD process. You're going to allow the feelings to be there. You're not going to chase them. You're not going to try to neutralize them by confessing or seeking reassurance or mentally reviewing or staring at a wall. And then you're going to live your life. Why are you living your life? Because that part of your brain that is actually misfiring, that's creating part of this problem, does not speak English. You cannot sit there and say to your brain, Jennifer, you're a really good person, and you know that, so knock it off. All your brain hears is womp, 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 and it interprets as Jennifer's taking this seriously. She's paying attention to it again. I must be onto something. Let's keep going. It's a bluff, okay? And you've got to treat it as the bluff that it is. I had a good friend who helped coach me through some of my OCD stuff say, if you knew the cards were marked, would you keep gambling? And that's what we're doing with OCD when we realize, we have OCD, or we have a vulnerability to this at times in our lives. And this thing has gotten my attention. It's taking over my life. But I'm still gambling. I'm still sitting down and wondering, why can't I stop thinking that? Or maybe this one's real, or maybe this one means something. So again, with real event OCD, the bluff can sometimes be a little bit stronger because we don't have that argument to make about, OCD thoughts are bother us because they go against our values. We don't have that argument sometimes because we think, no, I really did this, or this really did happen. Okay, so then we have to look at, number one, is this an OCD process? Make the decision that it is. Does it come with a sense of urgency? Does it come with a whoosh of anxiety, dread, doom, gloom, despair, shame, guilt, disgust? Do we have that urgency to need to figure it out, fix it, amend it, get to the bottom of it right now? Okay, these are all telltale signs that we're not in a problem-solving mode of regular day-to-day life, that we're actually in a more disordered state, and that we are, in the land of OCD. So make the decision to treat it as such. Drop the content. The content doesn't matter. You figure out the content that you're in now. I promise you, if you do that, it's going to find something else. The only way it's not going to find something else is if you learn to leave it alone, if you learn to see it for what it is. So I got bluffed big time by real event OCD. So I'm going to probably talk about this one more than others in some ways, because I also found there wasn't a lot out there when I was looking for this. Like, again, I would actually get confused. I would watch OCD videos, and I would think, well, geez, I wish I had harm OCD, because there's a lot out there on this one, and I'd be able to tell myself that I wouldn't really hurt somebody. That thought would never bother me. Well, bingo. When my real event dropped and moved into harm, And I had to contend with that one. And that's when I started to realize, like, oh, there's going to be endless branches and leaves on this tree if I keep paying attention to the branches and the leaves. I need to pay attention to the trunk. I need to pay attention to the tree. It is OCD. I don't need to think about what the branch looks like, or what the current thought of the day is, or what the current theme of the day is. I need to leave it all alone. I need to adopt that attitude of irrelevance. I need to not give a shit, excuse my language, and leave it alone. And let my brain recognize that I'm not going to continue to feed it fear on top of fear on top of fear, and basically just cement this idea that it's sending me these messages that are something I have to pay attention to. I hope this was helpful, guys. Take care.